Welcome back to Communicology. Today I'd like to talk about something that doesn't seem like it's a hot button issue until you bring it up and start talking about it. And then it moves from the far back of the mind to the tip of the tongue real fast. And that is, how should we dress? Now that sounds weird. Like, what do you mean? Like, of course we should put on clothes. I'm talking about like the clothes that we choose and how they speak in a nonverbal communicative way to other people. And how then should we then dress for any particular situation, any particular time? And the thing that made me wonder about this is I was poking around on Facebook and I saw a discussion that was going on about whether or not men should wear suits in church. Simple, easy enough question until you start digging through the comments and you'll find out really it's an amazingly hot button issue. And it's the same hot button issue on the other side when people say, women should dress in a way that's modest and not wear things that are revealing. Man, that'll explode too. But it's kind of funny because on both sides you'll see the same basic responses. Don't tell me how to dress. If you don't like what I'm wearing, that's on you, and all those kind of comments. But it gets you to think, what is proper? Now, most people who typically argue, for the don't tell me what to do thing is mostly all about like my own personal comfort. It's, you read the comments on either way, the male or the female comments, and it's incredibly narcissistic. It's all about what I want, my comfort, my preference, leave me alone. But that doesn't hold up to much scrutiny till when we start looking at other situations and how we then we walk into those situations. But you also see, too, that it seeps into the real world and it creates all kinds of other problems that I see at the college level. So let's talk about those kind of different things, and then we'll see how it all shakes out, and maybe you'll feel strongly about it one way or another and leave a comment, or maybe you'll delete your mentions of me and never talk about my videos again. Who knows what's going to happen. But anyway, what should you wear? How should you dress? Well, obviously, the first stumbling block we come across is the concept of, what's culturally appropriate? And that's usually a lot of times people hinge their comments on that. But the truth of the matter is that culture does shape that. But is culture always right? We can have situations where like wearing this might be popular, but that's not necessarily a good idea. So grounding everything in its cultural isn't always a good thing because, why should we do this or not do this because it's popular? That's what's known as the bandwagon fallacy. It's a type of logical fallacy where everyone else is doing it, therefore I should too. You'll remember maybe when you were young, a parent saying, if your friends jumped off a bridge, would you do it too? And of course the answer is, well, it depends on the bridge, right? Because if it's a short bridge, deep water, why not? Tall bridge, shallow water, probably not. So it's one of those things where you start thinking about the idea of, well, what do I do? What should I wear? Do I trust culture? And then there's the people, of course, that like to go their own way and just dress how they feel and how they want anyway. And sometimes they like to dress in a way it's countercultural. Like if the culture likes this, I'm going to dress something totally differently just to see, to get that response from people. Like when I was growing up, the people who did this were typically like goths, and they just chose to dress that way. Like they'll listen to The Cure and things like that, and they'll wear all black and they'll walk around all moody, like a decade or plus ago we went through like this emo phase. Well, that's basically the same kind of premise. But again, that's a rejection of culture to an extreme. Somewhere in between there's probably actually a happy medium because who gets to determine what's cultural for clothing? Well, it's again, cultural things are based on individuals acting within a framework of other individuals. So somebody wears something a certain way, other people like it, they copy it, and next thing you know, several people wearing things that certain way. And you'll see it shifts very slowly over time because, again, as we talked before about culture can be changed, but it's really slow. So you watch, old footage of old baseball games. And you'll see the people in the stands. All the men are wearing suits and the women are wearing dresses. And you're like, that's not normal. I mean, who would do that? Everybody did back then. In fact, it wasn't too terribly long ago in American history where it was considered very poor if you were a man to go out and not be wearing a suit. Even if you're running to the store to pick up a copy of the newspaper, you wore your suit, and that was the way it worked. Now, we might think that's crazy today, and not too many people do that kind of a thing. But that didn't happen like overnight. That was a very slow and gradual change. To the point now, when you go into Walmart, you'll see lots of people wearing pajamas. Like, how did we get from this to this? Well, again, it wasn't just a bam overnight thing. It was a very slow, gradual thing. And the familiarity with each other has changed a lot. You see social media really ramp that up where people overshare, like crazy. And then also you have the movement, like during the millennial generation of, to be proud of and shout out your mental health issues and stuff like that. Instead of hiding them, be proud of them and shout them to the world. And so you get like this hyper familiarity with people to the point where, whatever, you see me at my raw basics, so why not wear pajamas? I'm not saying that one obviously leads to the other, but it's you can see culturally this shift where people are typically more private, more proud of their appearance, and dressed accordingly. And then it's changed to the point where people are far more open about who they are and dress in this raw, unfiltered way. So you see that long, gradual shift over the past 30, 40, 50, 80 years even. And it's one of those things, it's not too surprising if you just watch it from those lenses. If you take this snapshot and this snapshot, it's jarring, the difference. So the cultural thing does change. And then also the idea as a culture, what do we think is appropriate? What do we think is inappropriate? So you can see that kind of understanding. So if I think it's okay that you wear this or you wear that, and most people do, and we see on TV people are dressed that way, we see in the movies people are dressed that way, it becomes this idea as part of the zeitgeist of the time that says, it's perfectly okay to dress this way for this certain thing. However, whenever you look at the way things tend to flesh out, you'll find that people tend to dress, or at least they used to. This is even changing. We'll talk about that more in a minute. The idea that people dress according to a situation. Like, obviously, if I'm going swimming, I wear swimming trunks. I don't wear a suit. That would ruin the suit. So I wear swimming trunks. If I'm going to, go to play basketball or baseball, I'll wear the appropriate gear because that's what's appropriate, to best play that sport. That's appropriate. If I go on a job interview, how do I dress? Well, it depends on the job interview. If I'm going to McDonald's to work on the line to make food, you can get away with a t-shirt and jeans. If you want to dress up, you could wear a polo shirt, and that's dressing up for that interview. But if you're working for McDonald's corporate, then you probably should wear a suit. And you see that kind of thing. Well, how should I dress? Why? For what reason? But it's not just in the business world. You also move into the private world too. Go on a first date. Look how long people take to get ready for that first date. All that time spent doing hair, all the grooming work that happens, picking out the right outfit, trying to look really good to make that first impression. And then you look at date number 200 and people are wearing something, as long as it doesn't have too many stains on it or tears, that's good enough. We're just going out on a date. And like what happened between date 1 and date 200, or even date 1 and date 20? I mean, you'll see a radical change. So why do we see that change, and why did we dress up in the first place? If you're going to get married, you wear the fine dress or the tuxedo. Why? Why do we do that? Well, at the very basics of it, it's the respect of the moment and the respect for the other. So whenever we're in those situations, like I go to a job interview, that's a very important moment, and where I'm going into someone else's property, I'm going to try to represent myself well. And I respect that situation of this is a job interview. I'm supposed to do this. And also I respect you as an interviewer. You're going to be talking to me. You're in the position of authority. You're the hiring manager. I want to make sure that I respect you properly. If you get married, again, I respect this moment. We're going into the church. We're in front of all of the family and friends. We're before the pastor. We're before God. and I'm also in front of a spouse. I want to respect the whole moment, including the spouse. So you dress in that nice dress or the tuxedo because that moment calls for it. And when you celebrate subsequent anniversaries, like we're going to dress up and go on that moment. So we have that kind of thing, and we start to wonder how that then works in other aspects of life. Like, I'll have students all the time wrestle with the idea of how should I dress? And you'll see that kind of thing. Like, well, what do you mean? And like, well, just for classes? Or do you mean for days when they're giving speeches, or days where you have like the capstone presentation? And, those things traditionally students understand. Like when you show up and you give a speech, you're aiming for a better grade. You're trying to impress the audience, especially the professor who's back there doing the grading. So that's important to dress a little bit better. Plus, you're trying to represent the best version of yourself. So you're going to put on something nice to give that speech. Or if you're giving a final presentation, boy, that's important. That's a major part of your grade. It might be worth 20, 25% of your grade. So you say that there's a weighty moment here. It's not like I'm just answering a question in class. It's important. So I need to ask myself, how should I represent myself to get that better grade? And there is there's an adage of the look good, feel good thing that comes into play too, sure. Like I feel more in command. I feel more powerful. I feel like I have more presence when I dress that way. Well, why do you feel that way? Because it's just clothes. I mean, if you really look at it in the basics, you're either naked or you're clothed. So at that point, well, why do you feel better when you're dressed nicely? Well, because again, good-looking clothes, first, I mean, like proper dress clothes, they look good. They look better than just a t-shirt. And also, they tend to be cut well, too, and they fit you well, and you just have a more commanding presence. And people notice you when you walk in a room because you stand out and you're different, and you're wearing clothes that look good and fit you well. So you tend to feel like, I like this feeling. I like feeling like I've got some gravitas, some presence to myself and how I appear. So you tend to feel more at ease and you feel more comfortable. Whereas some people go the other way, and I'm seeing this more and more in the classroom. Students wearing the most bare minimum to give a presentation or to give a speech. It's like, this is worth 10, 15, 20, 25% of your grade, and you show up in sweatpants? Like, don't you think that this is like, again, it's not like you're sitting there answering questions and raising your hand and you're sitting there at your desk dressed in sweats, no big deal. But whenever you're giving your presentation, like, why did you think that that's worth 20% of your grade should be approached with such flippancy? Well, I want to be comfortable. Well, what do you mean by comfortable? Like, I want to just not be wearing like guys especially, I don't wear a suit, especially because I don't want to have to wear a tie. But the thing is, if you have a properly fitting suit with a properly fitting tie, they're comfortable. If you buy the wrong size shirt and then cinch the tie up to your neck, that's not good. It's not going to be very comfortable. No kidding. Or if it's like 95 degrees out and you're wearing a suit out in the sunshine, that's not necessarily comfortable either. There aren't too many clothes that are comfortable in that. But to be honest, if you have a good fitting suit, and I'm not talking about a high dollar suit, I'm talking about a good fitting suit, which you can find good fitting suits for $100, $200, $300 pretty easily at a lot of different stores, But the thing is taking the time to find the one that fits you right. Same thing with dresses, like if you want to wear a dress and you want to have this certain look and feel, like, sometimes, in talking with women, they'll tell you that sometimes, dresses can be very comfortable, way more cooler than actually wearing pants and jeans. I know for me, like if I've got a pair of slacks on versus jeans, the slacks are more comfortable. They're thinner, they're breezier, they're just, the material is much more skin friendly than jeans are. Jeans are much, denim is stiff and not very pliable, and especially compared to slacks. So if you were talking about comfort, then slacks are actually better than jeans. So why not just wear them? But the thing is that approach to the moment is what has, I think, greatly changed. And you see that respect changing, that like I am looking at you as someone to respect, to be more like you need to respect me, that I get to do what I want to do. You can hear the narcissism pouring out of those kind of statements. I want what I want because I want it. It's not like, for this moment, yeah, I wear the suit because that's proper and right. Or because it makes me look more professional. Or because the person that I'm going in front of is much more, has much more gravitas than I do, and they deserve that respect. So, like for the example of showing at church, you'll have this battle between God, accepts people who they are, and no, it's God is holy, holy, holy. We should approach him with much more reverence. And then you see those kind of issues fighting at each other. But the problem with the God accepts you who you are, there's no biblical warrant for that. I mean, the scripture tells us how holy God is, but that God accepts us for who we are is not true. God accepts us despite who we are, and he hopes for us to change and to show reverence. When people go before God, they're overwhelmed. That's why one of the great commands that you typically hear anytime an angel shows up is don't be afraid. It's because you're so overwhelmed. It's not that God is a buddy. And, moving this into the real world, when you go on a job interview, that person across the table from you is not your buddy. It's the hiring manager. He or she has power. He or she has authority. He or she can make a decision that will alter the course of your life to hire you or to not hire you. Don't you think you might want to walk into that situation with a little bit more respect and a little bit more self-restraint? It's not up to me to show you how awesome I am with all my fancy words, and trust me, my thoughts are great. I love how I am. No, I have to show that in some way. And one of the first things is that first impression, showing up in some good-looking clothes. And that includes a suit. Well, what if I can't afford a suit? Well, the truth of the matter is like I said before, suits are actually quite affordable. You could buy a brand new one for $100, $150, $200, $250, all day. You can find suits like that. Well, that's even high. Well, you can still go to like a Salvation Army or a Goodwill and get a used one. There are lots of used suits at those stores because suits, people pass, them, they just no longer want to wear them, so they're there. Or people gain or lose weight, and the suits end up at Salvation Army. And you can find tons of good-looking suits for real cheap. I mean, the same college student who says, I can't afford a suit, is wearing a $60 hoodie, carrying a $1,500 iPhone, and drinking a $7 coffee every day. It's like, you can afford a suit. They're not really that expensive. They're actually easy to find. And I actually helped a student one time. I took him to Walmart, and we found him a dress shirt. We found him khakis. We found him a tie. And out the door, he was not paying very much. And it was just one of those things that he was concerned, like, I want to make sure that I look good. How can I look good? And he's also thinking ahead, because like when you buy a suit, it's not a one and done thing. He was thinking ahead of the idea of, well, he's a student athlete. He might have to go to like, end of season dinners and things like that. Well, you want to go looking pretty good and those kind of things. So he'd have that. So the other thing, though, is the idea of then how do I show respect? How do I show reverence to the person? Is it just a mental thought game of like my thought, my heart are respectful, and that should be good enough? I mean, do you expect people to consider you to be good enough? You're not happy if people disrespect you. Why do you think a hiring manager would be, or a first date would be, or your spouse on your wedding day would be, or God in church would be okay with, it's okay. I understand that you're a lazy bum and don't want to put anything on. I'm cool with that. Oh, you want to be comfortable? Oh, no big deal. God doesn't negotiate his holiness. And hiring managers don't negotiate that, like, oh, no big deal. Come as you are. And that just doesn't work. And that's one of the biggest problems that we're seeing in colleges and also into the workforce. People taking it too flippantly. They're just unserious about how their appearance actually talks. Now, if you're hiding in a cube somewhere, whatever, you can get away with it. But when you have to actually step out and meet the public, when you're facing clients, whether it's a $20 deal or a $20 million deal, you need to be dressed appropriately to look like you're serious and that you matter in your position and that you take this moment, this negotiation, this time where we're doing face-to-face work as something serious. And very rarely we do that anymore. For example, in college, I wear a suit. I'm one of the old school guys who still wears a suit. And most days, I dress better even than the president, which is kind of crazy to say. The president, he'll have a suit on but no tie a lot of times. I'm still in the tie. I mean, I do it because I respect academia. I respect the university. I respect my field. I respect my students. And it shows this line. I'm not your buddy. Here's a line between you and me. Can I be friends with you? Sure. I can certainly be friendly towards my students. But at the end of the day, I still hold the grade book, and I might have to give you an F. I might have to give you a D. And that wearing a suit shows that there is this line of demarcation that exists, and exists for a reason. Not that I'm like, oh, I'm better than you because I've got a PhD. It's my authority, my position. I have to be in charge of this classroom. I'm the one who's supposed to be, focusing on how to help you, hit your career goals, to get your educational goals in line. That's a position of authority that I have to show that too. So again, it's one of those things that I dress that way for the respect for the position, not to show off myself, but respect for the position, and also respect for my students, because they deserve that kind of respect. They need to know that their professor's serious, that he's not some clown who's seen Dead Poets Society too many times. I'm there to be the professor who shepherds them and guides them through their education. So again, when it comes to dressing, I'm not calling that you must do this and you must do that. I'm thinking about what you should do. If I want to show you I respect you, what should I wear? If I want to respect this person or that person, or in church, if I want to show that I respect God, what should I wear? Yeah, it is a matter of the mind and a matter of the heart too, but that shows in how I appear in my attire. So I want you to be thinking about that. Challenge yourself a little bit to think about that. What is respectful? If I want to show someone respect, how should I look? Thank you very much for tuning in today. And as always, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. Thanks for hanging around this long anyway. But we'll see you next time on Communicology.